When I watched the surveillance footage, my stomach dropped. There they were, Kathy and that man, standing just outside the front door. They didn't even try to hide. Instead, they kissed passionately, completely unconcerned about being seen. Then, without hesitation, they walked inside together. A cold wave of disgust and betrayal washed over me as I watched it unfold. Years of trust, of building a life together, collapsed in mere seconds. It was undeniable, something I couldn't explain away or ignore. That single moment sealed the fate of our marriage. I immediately instructed the investigator to compile everything into a detailed report and inform me when it was ready. Seeing such irrefutable evidence felt like the final blow, the last nail in the coffin of our relationship. 2 decades together. Gone, reduced to something so careless, so thoughtless. There was no coming back from this. My name is Ted. I'm 56 years old and own a small auto repair shop. I was married to Kathy, who's now 52, until we separated. Right now, I haven't told my family what's going on because the wounds are still too fresh. After 20 years together, I recently uncovered the painful truth. Kathy had been unfaithful. The way I found out wasn't something I had planned. It happened by accident. Kathy, a nurse practitioner, had told me she was scheduled for an overnight shift. I didn't think much of it at first, but when I tried calling her later, she didn't answer. My worry grew when I kept trying, and there was still no response. Something felt off. I decided to call the hospital, just to check in. When they casually mentioned that she had left hours ago, my heart sank. That didn't make sense. Why would she say she had to work if she had already left? That was the moment my suspicion took root. Hoping to ease my mind, I drove to her workplace to see if her car was still parked there. But it wasn't. The unease in my gut only intensified. Something wasn't right. I drove around aimlessly, searching for any sign of her vehicle, but it was nowhere to be found. Each passing minute made my anxiety worse. I called her again, straight to voicemail. I left a message, trying to sound calm, but inside, panic was rising. Kathy had never kept secrets from me before. If something was wrong, I believed she would have told me. And yet, something was very wrong, and she was saying nothing. I had no idea what to do, only that I needed to find out the truth. After driving around with no luck, I finally returned home and waited. Maybe she'd call back with an explanation, something to prove my suspicions wrong. But the longer I sat there, the worse the sick feeling in my stomach became. Then, at 7 a.m., my phone finally rang. Her voice was calm, almost too calm. She apologized, claiming she had been overwhelmed with work and hadn't been able to respond sooner. I knew she was lying. Something in her tone, in the way she carefully pieced her words together, it didn't sit right. But rather than confronting her over the phone, I simply said, "It's okay. We'll talk when you get home." An hour later, at 8 a.m., she walked through the door looking exhausted. Without missing a beat, she launched into an elaborate story about a patient needing constant care throughout the night. I stood there pretending to listen, but my mind was elsewhere. I wasn't absorbing a single word. The only thing running through my head was one simple question. How could I uncover the truth she was so desperately trying to hide? I watched her carefully, analyzing every word she spoke and every gesture she made. Eventually, she excused herself, cleaned up, and went to bed. I had to head to work, and since I was employed by the city, I couldn't just take time off to track her movements. If she was being unfaithful, I needed undeniable proof. During my lunch break, I contacted a few private investigators. Their services weren't cheap, but they came highly recommended. I didn't have the time to follow her myself, and I needed the truth, no matter what it took. Living in Georgia, I also started researching divorce laws, even though part of me wasn't ready to confront that reality. I hadn't entered this marriage with the thought of it ever falling apart, but if Kathy had betrayed me, I knew I couldn't stay. Thankfully, we didn't have children. Over the years, Kathy had endured 3 miscarriages, and those losses had been incredibly painful. But we had faced them together. This, however, this was different. This wasn't grief or misfortune. This was a deliberate choice, and it shattered everything I believed in. Still, before making any irreversible decisions, I had to be certain. I needed undeniable confirmation. The investigator assured me that he could uncover what Kathy was doing, but it would take time. I hesitated, unsure if I was truly ready for what he might find. Instead of giving him the go-ahead immediately, I told him I needed a little more time to process everything. Later that day, when I got home around 5 p.m., I found Kathy in our bedroom, speaking to someone on the phone. I couldn't make out the conversation, but her voice carried a tense, almost anxious tone. Not wanting to intrude, I went to the kitchen and started preparing dinner, though my mind raced with suspicion. Minutes later, she joined me as if nothing had happened. She acted completely normal, but something was off. I could feel it in the way she moved, in the silence between us. She casually mentioned that she had been on the phone with her best friend, discussing personal matters. I didn't press further, but the unease in my chest refused to fade. That night, when she said she had to work, I took the opportunity to prepare a meal for her before she left. We exchanged a few words, and then, just before midnight, she walked out the door. A short while later, I called the hospital, just to check in. The staff informed me that she had left about 30 minutes earlier, saying she was going out to grab a bite to eat. That struck me as strange. I had just made her dinner. Why would she need to go out for food? A small seed of doubt took root, and I realized something wasn't adding up. But instead of calling her to question it, I remained quiet. I decided to observe. The next morning, as I drove to work, I contacted the investigator again. This time, I didn't hesitate. Over the phone, I provided my credit card details and decided to move forward with uncovering the truth. That evening, I met with him in person, bringing along photos and any information that might help. I signed all the necessary paperwork and made it clear, I wanted surveillance to begin immediately. For the first few nights, the investigator reported nothing unusual. Kathy's car remained parked at the hospital, unmoved. That surprised me, but I knew it was only a matter of time before something surfaced. Then, a few nights later, I received the call that changed everything. The investigator had captured footage of Kathy arriving at a house late at night. He described how she moved with an unusual level of caution, looking around as if checking for anyone watching. But what stood out the most was what happened next. She changed clothes in her car, switching into workout gear before heading inside. He explained that she had been following the same routine multiple times. She would drive about 10 minutes from the hospital to this house, enter as if she had a key, and stay inside for 45 minutes to an hour. When she left, no one ever walked out with her. Everything was done discreetly, almost calculated. Her movements were so precise, so careful. It was as if she was trying to ensure no one would ever notice. After each visit, she would drive back to the hospital, change back into her scrubs, and resume her shift. It turned out that all of this had been happening during her supposed lunch breaks. Despite the growing evidence against her, I still clung to a sliver of doubt, hoping, praying, that there was some explanation. But deep down, I already knew. The truth was unraveling, and there was no stopping it now. I told the investigator I needed something undeniable, clear-cut proof that she was involved with another man in an intimate way. As much as it pained me to make that request, I couldn't confront her without irrefutable evidence. He assured me that he would continue gathering more incriminating footage. A few nights later, he called again with an update. This time, the surveillance showed Kathy meeting a man at a late-night diner. According to the investigator, she walked in, greeted him with a kiss, and then sat down across from him. He noted that she must have taken an extended break since she remained there for nearly an hour before returning to work. But this meeting was different. It was bolder. The fact that she kissed him so openly in public told me everything I needed to know. Things were escalating. After finishing their meal, the investigator followed them as they left in separate cars and drove to his home. They parked, stepped out, and met at the front door. Without hesitation, they embraced, kissing again before disappearing inside together. That footage was the breaking point. I instructed the investigator to compile every piece of evidence he had and to notify me once everything was ready. In the days that followed, I braced myself for what was coming. I went over my options, carefully planning my next steps. I didn't want any loose ends that could make things more difficult later. I reached out to my attorney and laid everything on the table. He listened carefully and immediately began guiding me through the divorce process. His advice was straightforward. He wanted to ensure I was fully prepared for what lay ahead. A few days later, the investigator contacted me again. He had compiled all the surveillance footage. When I arrived at his office, I already knew what I was about to see. Yet, even with that knowledge, watching the betrayal play out on the screen felt unreal. Despite everything, I had never confronted Kathy. I hadn't even changed how I acted around her. Our marriage had felt empty for a while, and part of me couldn't help but wonder, had this been the cause all along? During my meeting with my attorney, he brought up something I hadn't considered: spousal support. I was taken aback. When I asked why that would be necessary, he pointed out the significant income gap between Kathy and me. As a nurse practitioner, she earned close to $100,000 a year, while my income from the auto repair shop was around $55,000. He suggested I pursue spousal support as part of the divorce proceedings. At first, I hesitated, unsure if that was the right move. But after thinking it through, I agreed to include it in the case. When Kathy was served the divorce papers at work, she wasted no time calling me. Her voice was laced with panic, confusion, and disbelief. "What's going on? Divorce papers? What is this about?" she demanded. I remained calm. "I think you already know, Kathy." A long silence stretched between us, the weight of my words settling in. When she finally spoke again, her tone had shifted, cautious, almost hesitant. "Wait, are you saying you had someone follow me?" I didn't hesitate. "Yes." Her initial panic quickly morphed into outrage. "You actually hired a private investigator? That's disgusting. How could you?" she snapped. I remained unmoved. "I had to, Kathy. You weren't going to tell me the truth. I needed to know what was really going on." Her anger flared again, laced with desperation. "You invaded my privacy. You think that makes you any better than me? Spying on me like that? How long have you been watching me?" My voice stayed steady. "Long enough. Long enough to know you've been lying to my face, sneaking around behind my back. I've seen everything." Her rage wavered, giving way to fear. "I'm sorry, Ted. I didn't mean for this to happen. We can fix this. We can go to counseling. Please, you don't have to do this." I cut through her excuses. "There's nothing to fix. You lied. You cheated. And now you want to pretend none of it happened." Her voice softened, turning pleading. "It wasn't supposed to be like this." I was confused. "I made mistakes, but Ted, we've been through so much together. We can get through this too." My patience snapped. "What about all those nights you told me you were working late? The times I sat at home, wondering why everything was falling apart between us? You knew exactly what you were doing, Kathy. And you just didn't care." I never asked her why she did it. The reason didn't matter. The dead don't question their killers about why they were murdered. She had killed something inside me. My trust, my belief in our marriage. No explanation could change that. It was over. I moved out, got my own apartment, and left the house to her. It had been a gift from her father before we married, and I had no interest in keeping it. Letting go of that place felt like shedding a piece of a life that no longer belonged to me. During the divorce proceedings, I made the decision to pursue spousal support. It wasn't about vengeance. It was about fairness. With her earning nearly twice what I did, I needed to secure my future the same way she had secured hers. Her attorney tried to have the claim thrown out, but the judge ruled in my favor, $900 a month for 6 years. I hadn't expected to win, but it felt fitting. For the next 6 years, Kathy's betrayal would cost her. Every payment would serve as a reminder of the choices she had made. After the divorce was finalized, a sense of relief washed over me. I was finally free. I never saw or spoke to Kathy again. But I did stay in touch with the private investigator. And what he uncovered afterward shocked me. The man she had been seeing wasn't just any guy. He was a married police officer. His wife had been away on business during their affair. But when she returned and discovered what had been happening, she was consumed by fury. She shot him. He survived. But his wife was now facing trial for attempted murder. And just like that, Kathy's reckless choices had left destruction in their wake. Then, 6 years later, the final alimony payment landed in my account. I knew exactly what I was going to do next. I gathered every piece of evidence the investigator had compiled, videos, photos, messages. And then I put together a list of her closest family members and friends, the people she interacted with regularly. I didn't hold back. In one swift move, I sent everything, exposing the truth of who she really was. Her betrayal wasn't going to stay hidden any longer.